Thank you so much for joining us today for understanding the impact of California's Pet Assistance and Support Program. I imagine that most of you have a basic understanding of the program if you're here, but just in case, let me start with a quick overview to set the stage. The California Pet Assistance and Support Program, or what's commonly known as the PASS program, or some people call it the PAWS program, was the first state-funded program in the nation to recognize that for many, the inability to find emergency housing that allowed their pets was keeping people in vulnerable situations. The state committed to removing this barrier to housing by allocating $16 million of state general fund revenue. That means just the general fund for all operations in the state. And they did that over 3 budget years. Grants were awarded to shelters to fund on-site housing for pets, along with pet food, pet supplies, basic veterinary service, behavioral services. And that really ensured that the pets were being provided with a safety net along with their people. The popularity of the program was overwhelming, with applications exceeding funding by 2 to 1, clearly indicating the significance of the new no pets barrier. And as the program was rolling out, Christine, Kim, and I had begun to talk about what types of data we really needed to have in order to build the case for co-housing outside of California. We knew that the PASS program provided a real-time opportunity to measure the impact of allowing pets to stay with their people. We were so lucky to find a research partner in the Homelessness Policy Research Institute at USC, who was excited as we were to test whether what we believe to be true, that co-housing makes an enormous difference in people's lives and certainly in their pets' lives, by looking at how the PASS program performed. So today we have 2 speakers that will help us understand the impact that this type of program can have. All right, so without further ado, first from the research team, Nick Weinmeister is a administrator at Homeless Policy Research Institute. He holds a Master of Public Policy from the USC Price School of Public Policy, which is where he developed his interests in housing and homelessness policy, as well as strategies using policy, research, and communication as tools to pursue social and racial justice. In his prior work life, Nick worked at the Los Angeles Housing Services Authority, LAHSA, you may know, as part of its policy team. Nick facilitated a variety of research on emerging issues in homelessness, created policies pursuant to the goals of the Los Angeles Continuum of Care, among many other projects. Thank you for being here, Nick. And next we have Jessie Casement. She is the Chief Client Services Officer at Father Joe's Villages in San Diego, California. Jessie has dedicated her 16-year career with one of the largest service providers in San Diego. In that time, she has championed the view that shelters should welcome pets along with their humans. Jessie has fostered relationships with local animal welfare organizations and veterinary providers in order to bring resources, education, and support to the clients living at Father Joe's Villages with their animals, as well as to the Father Joe's Villages staff who strive to create a welcoming and safe environment for people and their pets. And not only does Jessie practice what she preaches at Father Joe's, but she's also committed to sharing what she's learned with others as they strive to create their own co-sheltering programs. And one way that Jessie does this is through her regular participation in the My Dog is My Home co-sheltering collaborative. So if any of your practical questions don't get answered today, you can find her on future collaborative calls. Thank you for being here, Jessie. And we're excited to dive into the PASS program. But before we do, I want to give Nick and Jessie an opportunity to talk about what their broader organizations do. So Nick, can you take us just tell us a little bit more about USC's Homeless Policy Research Institute?
Yeah, for sure. Good to see everyone. Thank you for joining us, making time to be a part of this discussion. Really appreciate it. Yeah, like was mentioned, my name's Nick. I am our project administrator, a wonderfully nebulous title, but part of my work is overseeing what we would call our rapid response portfolio of research, and that's where this project falls, which basically is, a little bit different than the kind of stereotypical peer-reviewed academic journal kind of publications. A lot of what we do with this portfolio of work is working with providers, advocacy organizations, entities that are doing the work on the ground and providing them with research capacity that they might not otherwise have, and hopefully doing so in a rapid nature so that they can do their jobs better. So that is one key facet that's really relevant to our work. Also, we convene on a regular basis, 100 over 200 now members across policy making, service provision, and research around homelessness, and basically discuss what are the emerging pieces of research, what are the most pressing topics of the day, and what are pilots and opportunities for us to learn with and from one another as it relates to ending homelessness. So that's a little bit about me and what we do.
Thanks, Nick. Jesse, I'll turn it over to you to hear a little bit more about Father Joe's. Should be at the bottom of the screen.
It was saying I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to My Dog is My Home for hosting this conference. It's always such a pleasure to attend, and I'm truly thrilled to be able to be here with you all today. Father Joe's Villages is a large provider of services for people experiencing homelessness in San Diego. For over 75 years now, we've worked toward our mission of preventing and ending homelessness one life at a time, and we do that work through what we call our 4 pillars of care. Those 4 pillars are meeting basic needs, investing in children, making health a priority, and strengthening self-sufficiency. At our downtown campus and scattered sites across San Diego County, our team members work really hard to connect with and walk alongside our clients as they move through their housing crisis. And we use what's called our CREED, that stands for compassion, respect, empathy, empowerment, and dignity in every interaction along the way. But we know that no matter how transformative our services are, they don't mean anything if we can't get people into the doors, and to create barriers to shelter and entry into our programs is problematic, which is why we made the decision to become fully pet inclusive in our shelters in 2020. Every single night we operate just under 800 shelter beds, and then during the winter wet and cold months we add an additional 134 beds. So on any given night we could have up to 934 people living on our campus, and every single one of those beds is pet inclusive. That's a policy shift that we've seen make a really tremendous difference to people experiencing homelessness with pets who otherwise would have to make, frankly, a heartbreaking decision between being able to keep their animal or coming into the safety of shelter. So we've learned a lot through this process over the years, and we hope for other organizations to be able to also become pet inclusive, which is why I'm really happy to be able to be here and be part of this conversation today. Thank you.
thanks, Jesse. And thank you both for your very inspiring and important work. Okay, let's now dive into PASS. Nick, you were the lead researcher on this project. So tell us what the top line findings of the study were and more about the methodology you used to assess the program.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll kind of start with that second part first, just to kind of get us all situated when we're talking about like this study or evaluation. Let's all just get on the same page about what that means. So first off, when we're talking about evaluating a program, obviously you need to look at what are the kind of inputs and outputs of that program to understand its function. So what that looked like on our end is obviously first starting with, as we always do in research, starting with background research. And understanding one, what is the PASS program and how does it function? Kind of how was it brought about and where is it at in its lifespan? And then two, situating that in the kind of broader scope of this issue of like homelessness, as well as folks experiencing homelessness with pets. And I mean, you all probably, this the motivation for this entire conference, but I will, I just can't help but indulge the two kind of key data points around that. Obviously, this is a really hard thing to measure. Homelessness data in general is in terms of kind of researcher data is challenging. So we have estimates of nationally speaking anywhere from 10% or as low as 6% all the way up to 24% of folks who are unhoused reporting living with pets. And then when we look at the work that has been done here in LA as our demographic survey, which is our unsheltered tool, the most recent figure that we had at the time of this publication was just shy of 16% of folks in 2024 who are living unsheltered with pets. So this is clearly a very important issue, not just for the PAWS program, but lots of other things. But that was part of our motivation in going about this study. So to that end, we requested records from HCD, which is the statewide statewide agency that is managing this program, the PAWS program. And we received basically the biannual reporting files that were required from the past organizations that participated in it. And the time period based on when we requested and received those, so what we were looking at was biannual from 2020, so the start of this program, to 2024. And that was, we had to cut it off so that we could eventually get started on analysis and writing. So it's not quite the life of it, but I'll touch on that later. And then, so that's the quantitative portion, is looking at those biannual reporting documents, specifically looking at service spending and outcomes data. And then the qualitative portion of it was interviewing provider organizations that did have the past funds. And we worked with 7 different organizations across counties, across the state, and then also making sure to look at differences in counties and areas in terms of like an urban versus rural divide, as we can sometimes see that those are different kinds of environments. So the last caveat about the study is just reminding us that it is technically a partial evaluation, because past funds are still eligible to be spent until June of this year. And then also we, in those biannual reports, we had data on spending and outcomes, but not on infrastructure spending. So those are 2 key caveats to keep in mind. But then moving swiftly into our top line findings, some of which you can see here. Obviously, one of the biggest takeaways that I think is not going to be surprising to anyone: dedicated funding enables people to serve a very high volume of people very well. And we can see here that there were over 4,400 clients served and over 4,600 pets served across 37 different provider organizations across the state. Obviously, with any kind of new funding like this, there is a ramp up period. So some of the earlier periods, we're seeing not as high of figures being served, but then around 2023, we saw really peak numbers with an average of 489 clients and 515 pets being served every year. The second kind of piece that we want to talk about, is Jesse already kind of mentioned a little bit about this, is we know that some of the organizations who worked with PAWS, they were already accepting and welcoming pets. But some organizations were a little hesitant to, and maybe they felt like they lacked the physical infrastructure necessary. Maybe they felt like they didn't have the policies in place to do it well, or their staff wasn't adequately trained. We heard several different kind of pieces around why people maybe felt that they were not able to, but this program basically gave them the space, the dedicated funding, and the push that they needed to get to saying yes to folks, to have those kinds of resources that they felt that they needed that maybe weren't in place, and to start welcoming folks with pets. And then for those organizations that were already doing so, like Father Joe's Village, obviously that provides just an additional amount of confidence and support and resources that had not previously existed. And also just want to remind folks that when it comes to the infrastructure investments as well, these are things that are going to be living on years into the future, which is really wonderful. It's, not just the short-term resources, which can be so helpful in outreach and serving people, but investments that are going to be here to stay in our communities. And then another piece that I want to highlight is around the connections that we saw providers making with this investment from the state. So many organizations were able to either strengthen existing connections to community resources or create new ones, thinking about things like veterinary clinics and offices, even some we heard folks talking about like some veterinary like dental specialists, folks that do different kinds of grooming, potentially emergency kinds of grooming for really serious issues, connections with humane societies. All of that was either bolstered by this program, or in some cases for folks who hadn't made a foray into that area, was able to be possible. And we hope that beyond the kind of sunsetting of this funding, that those connections will be able to remain and continue supporting folks with pets who are accessing shelter. And then the last thing for this kind of, actually, sorry, the two more things. The penultimate being, often we see that providers, they know their communities best, and they have a lot of existing relationships with folks, not just inside of their facilities, but also in the areas around them and around their general community. And their outreach staff often knew of folks who could have been reachable if they were able to be brought indoors with their pets and not separated from their pets. So having these resources on hand, being able to tell people, hey, not only can we welcome you in, we have food for your animal. We have access to free vaccinations. We have access to veterinary services. We have leashes, collars, crates, the whole nine. That is just instantly such a benefit to all of the providers in helping to reach previously unreachable clients, as well as instantly building a level of trust and rapport with them. And we know that is really key in getting folks to shelter and then hopefully housing as well. So now on I promise the last point is just highlighting on the last bullet here around what we saw in terms of outcomes and housing placements. We see, this is according to a 2024 California state auditor, that on average across the state, about 14% of folks who are accessing our homeless services systems are placed into some form of permanent housing. And what we saw was that the PAS clients experienced a decent but higher rating in terms of 20% of folks being converted into permanent housing. Obviously, that is still, not the majority of people, but that is an outperformance of what we see across the state and a really awesome piece to highlight as well, because that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and I love to highlight that last data because those are lives changed, and I think especially important there is these are folks that may not have left a situation that was dangerous to them and actually come into housing had they not been able to bring their pets. So that 20% really doesn't tell the whole story because those people may not have ever had any housing at all. So I really love that data. And, if that's what it does, I think we need to be doing it in all 50 states and at the federal government. Okay, well, let's turn to you, Jesse. So if I counted correctly, I think you guys were a four-time grantee. Is that correct?
That is,
Yeah,
yes.
that's amazing. Yeah, and and I'll say that the program design was really intended to allow the shelters that were really committed to the concept to come in and get multiple grants. Then the initial year you had to submit a grant for every or an application for every single site, and they learned that that all the different shelter providers were putting in multiple grants. And so the second and third year, they actually allowed them to do a single application for multiple sites, which was, I think, really a stroke of genius to do that to kind of streamline. So congratulations on four grants. And you guys were already working as a pet inclusive facility, as you already said. So how did the funding impact Father Joe's?
Well, we weren't quite pet inclusive yet. So Father Joe's Villages began serving emotional support animals and service animals, which I'll just refer to as assistive animals in this conversation, in 2010. And we were seeing great success with being able to serve people with animals. We also were a very low barrier version of an assistive animal provider. So we weren't asking for any kind of emotional support animal letters or anything to demonstrate that the animal was an assistive animal. But we knew through our engagement activities, like our outreach team and our public lunch line, that there were still a lot of people who were unsheltered with pets, who were really struggling to find a place that they could go into shelter with their animal. And so in 2019, we learned about the PAWS funding. We saw PAWS as an opportunity to expand from only serving people with assistive animals to being able to accept people with pets into our shelter. At that point, we had about a decade of time under our belt and serving animals, people with animals, and we knew that we could do it. We knew that we could do the work to serve pets. It was a minor policy shift operationally, but we also knew from our experience that there were things that we wanted to do to our campus in order to improve our services for what we anticipated to be an increase in the number of people that we saw with animals. So from an infrastructure standpoint, the slide that's up on the screen, we had two main priorities. First and foremost, our main campus is in downtown San Diego. It's in the East Village neighborhood. Outside of our doors are sidewalks. There are very few grassy areas in the area for an animal to eliminate. And we wanted to avoid our pet and animal owners from having to walk far distances in order to take their animal out to go potty, especially at night or in bad weather. So the pause funds allowed for the creation of 2 potty yards. The one that you see on the right of your screen with the little fire hydrant, a nice little touch from our team, is an internal potty yard in one of our internal courtyards that can be accessed only by shelter participants. But the other one on the left side of the screen is on the outside of our main building on our campus. And that particular potty yard is heavily utilized not only by our shelter participants, but by dogs who are living outside with their humans. So that one gets a lot of use, and we see benefit to that. It's it's an outreach opportunity, if you will, for people to understand that we are here to serve the human with their family members, regardless of whether those family members are human or furry or feathered. And so this is a way for people to see from the beginning, from the moment they step on our campus, that we're a pet inclusive space and that their animals are welcome here with them. The second infrastructure change that we made is on the next slide. We created pet bathing areas. So our shelter clients live in congregate and shared spaces. Hygiene is especially important, but we knew that we needed to create an appropriate space to avoid animals being washed in human showers or human sinks, and also to prevent people from bathing their animal outside where water runoff can be problematic. So our operations team worked really hard to identify multiple spaces on our campus. And, that may sound easier than it really was. Every nook and cranny of our campus is in use after 75 years, but they identified a couple of spots, and pet bathtubs were installed. That one on the left, the silver stainless steel tub, was our first to be put in. It was installed in one of our laundry rooms. Not perfect, but it was the space that we had at the time. And so we installed that and created pet bathing hours. But then one of our team members had a stroke of genius and thought, why don't we mimic what we do at the beaches here in San Diego and create almost like a beach bathtub? So that's the pet bathing area on the right that was created in one of our courtyards. And we have another one of those being created right now. So we have 2 that are already operational and have been for quite some time. And then we have a third that is on the way. So as you might imagine, pet bathtubs, potty yards require supplies like poop bags, pet shampoo, and the like. Pause Dollars definitely supported the purchase of those supplies, as well as making it easier for us to meet the needs of our clients who have animals with special diets due to age or species. And then, of course, like Nick mentioned, veterinary services and training classes. And I would say most importantly, out of everything that I've said thus far, is that the work to serve people with animals in a housing crisis requires trained, caring, and dedicated staff. These animals have been through crisis with their owner, whether that crisis is what resulted in the homelessness or the trauma resulted because of the homelessness. And so the animal and the human have been through a lot together. We have to have a team on site that is compassionate and is patient and is going to support the person and their animal in really establishing a calm, environment here in our shelter. So those staff were supported through our pause dollars. And, as pause has ended, that's where we're really feeling the biggest impact, is that those dollars are gone. We'll, of course, continue to do the work, but it was a lovely addition to our budget to have those dollars specifically for custodial and residential team members.
And of course, we would love to see more dollars come from the state in the future, and we'll continue to work on that. It's not the best time to be asking for dollars from the state, but we'll continue to push for it. So Nick, back to you. So in addition to the top line findings that you already shared with us, I believe the study revealed some other interesting trends in how grantees invested service spending. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. And, I think we have done a good job of laying this out because Jesse's given me some really great segues into talking about some of these things. And obviously, so we'll start here we'll start with spending. So on the right hand category here, we have a pie chart that shows you the breakdown of, again, in our 2020 to 2024 observed time period, this is what we can confirm in terms of spending based on the reporting. And by far and away, you can see, like Jesse just finished up talking about, the largest spending was on staffing. And this, I feel like, is pretty common in terms of homelessness programs, because having those staff who are able to serve folks to a high degree is integral in terms of getting them indoors, getting them on a service plan, and on the path towards housing. What we heard in terms of, beyond just the numbers of things, when we were interviewing folks, one of the most common strategies that we heard being deployed across the state with POS dollars, specifically in the staffing area, was either hiring or funding one person whose kind of sole focus was helping to administer those POS dollars and serving all of the clients with pets. This enabled a really strong relationship with the folks who are in those sites, a lot of familiarity with both them and their pets, and really those roles were able to not just help with only the client facing case management services, but those were also often the folks who were going out and making connections with veterinary clinics or grooming services out in the community. They were the ones sourcing pet food or relevant equipment and helping to arrange transportation to vet appointments when necessary, things like that. So this enabled a very valuable position in a lot of organizations, I would say. And, I think that often when we talk with the general public, a lot of folks are always surprised by how much adequate staffing costs. But I think that from our perspective, this has been a very effective investment of that money. And we have heard that ability to have that either like a low caseload, so not quite one-on-one, but a lot of connection with clients and knowing their needs, being able to be there consistently and help them feel like I can rely on this provider. I can rely on this specific POS staff member who knows everything that my pet and I are going through and are helping to get me on the right path. It's just so important. There's no way to put a price tag on that or undersell how valuable it is, because we heard many different stories in terms of folks coming indoors after being outside a long time and some of their pets being in, frankly, emergency health situations. And so having that staff person who had existing connections to clinics, and oftentimes their work was the reason that they were able to access clinics at discounted, if not free rates, we heard, and that's because of that staff ability to have a staff person who could go out and make those connections, have those conversations with veterinarian services in the area and help them understand this is an area of such high need and we have the opportunity to work together. Let's make this connection and make it happen. And so I do not think, as we have on the very top here, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that those connections improved and saved some lives. I would also say that when we are thinking about spending, just want to highlight, and I'll probably highlight this later on too, but this like purpose-specific funding really alleviated a lot of constraints that previously existed. And this is another thing that thankfully Jesse kind of gave us a little segue into in terms of before this pot of funding was made available to folks for organizations that were accepting folks with pets. You have to think about every time that they're on a budget cycle, they are put in this position of how much do we allocate? How much do we allocate to help people with pets? And knowing that for finite resources like food and other kinds of equipment, once those dollars are allocated and spent, that means it's less money that can go to other areas. So seeing providers put in this conundrum of, do we try and save our money to try and serve individuals or families without pets versus saying yes to people who are willing to come and work with us, but we may not have the money for it. That is an awful place to be put in, and this money alleviated that by having dedicated funds made available specifically to serve folks with pets, which we've already been over is a prevalent population. So now I want to pivot a little bit to, after we've looked at like the kind of spending patterns, I want to look at what was the service delivery like. And I think this chart here on the left-hand side is probably the best way of summarizing that. And something to really be celebrated with this is vaccination. And vaccination, also spay and neuter services. And in terms of when we think about policy impact, we often think about these kind of secondary impacts. And I think often people don't really think about those in the homelessness space because it is so focused on delivering to the clients. But when we think about the community well-being and the health of pets overall, not just limited to participants, this access to vaccination and spay neuter is something that had ripple effects beyond any one site. And I think that's really impressive given, especially the vaccinations, we're talking about thousands of vaccinations that were able to be provided to folks for free. Again, another really great asset for outreach teams in terms of building rapport with people and getting them inside, having that ability to have access to important medical services for their pets. And then also something else that Jesse touched on was behavioral support and those partnerships with entities that provide training, whether it's the Humane Society, other kinds of specific organizations that work on training with pets. We heard a lot of the kind of like detailed stories when we talked to providers around how these behavioral supports were really, really helpful, both in helping their sites run smoothly, whether that was kind of helping people to be informed around, adjusting to life inside in shared living spaces or with neighbors, having those resources available for both for pets and their human family members, to understand the pieces around behavioral well-being and how can I be a good neighbor, and equipping them for success in terms of shared living environments and beyond into just being a neighbor. And then another really key piece on behavioral supports that I want to lift up is we heard a lot about for specifically for congregate shelter settings, when there are folks who either have a job or are actively looking for jobs, when they need to go out in their community to go to their job or to go look for jobs and their pets are left behind, if they struggle with separation anxiety, that can become a very big problem very quickly. So having the resources to help alleviate and kind of work through some of that, again, sets them up not just for the short term, but for the long term. So I wanted to lift those two things up as it related to behavioral well-being. And then, like I mentioned before, just having the resources on hand is just invaluable for bringing folks indoors and creating a sense of trust among participants with staff. So I think I'll leave it there for that. And then we can always talk more during Q&A.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, I can't say enough about the basic veterinary services and the behavioral support in the program. I think that is so integral to setting, both the pets and the people up for success. So I'm so pleased that the findings really justify that inclusion and the importance of it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about data. Let's talk about the people that have been impacted. So back to Jesse. What feedback have you received from clients, and how do you feel that the client experience has been impacted by the inclusion of the infrastructure and the amenities and services that you were able to bring to them through the program?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. Overwhelmingly, we hear from our clients with pets that they would not have come into shelter if they had not been able to bring their pet. And we know from firsthand stories from our program participants that their pets are family members, and oftentimes their only source of comfort and love and sometimes safety during an unthinkable time in their lives. And so, to be able to welcome individuals exactly as they come with whoever is their family is really fits within our mission here at Father Joe's Villages, but is such a privilege to be able to extend to our clients. But aside from the pet owners, we also see the joy that animals bring into our milieu, even for those who don't own animals. There's a levity and comfort that animals bring into the shelter spaces, and really, you just see the interactions and community building and engagement that a dog can create by being silly out in the grassy area and playing with their owner, or just interactions that people will have that maybe they wouldn't have had if it wouldn't have been for the animal being present. So we definitely see the joy that is brought to all of our clients, not just a policy shift for our pet owning clients. So as I mentioned before, accepting pets was a small policy shift at Father Joe's Villages, but it opened a really wide door to individuals who would not have otherwise come inside to our programs. And by doing so, then they're able to utilize the breadth of services that we provide. And so, being able to serve pets is a wonderful ability as a program. But we can't lose sight, and Nick and Susan have both talked about, we can't lose sight of how, of what the work is that we're here to do, which is to end homelessness. And so if we can't get people to come inside and use our services, then how can we help them to end their homelessness? So by being able to accept pets, we are able to do the work that we are able to do and able to provide to our community members. But I could go on and on about what I think the benefits are. But I think the impact of our pet inclusivity policy is best heard not from me, but from one of our former program participants. So we have a short video that we'd like to share with you here today. And we'll play that now.
Sniggle Fritz means everything to me. I mean, he is my whole family. He's my companion. He's my best friend. He looks after me. So yeah, he means a lot to me. I am from Indiana originally. I moved out here in my senior year of high school. I have a bachelor's degree in finance. I was in the mortgage business for quite a while. I actually owned 2 houses. I was very successful and made some mistakes, bad decisions. But now this is my new start, and this guy here keeps me on track. It's amazing what a pet can do. I got Sniggle Fritz from the Humane Society. About a month later, I found out I had to move out of the home I had lived in for 5 years in Mira Mesa. It was just like some giant claw came out of the sky and grabbed me and Sniggle Fritz out of the place I lived in for 5 years, and all of a sudden we were living in a car. That was tough because the issue was finding work, and having him in the car, I had to either get just like these temporary jobs where he could be close by the car. I did have a job up in Irvine for 3 months, and that had covered parking, so I could walk out and check on him. I tried up there, to see if there was any temporary housing, and nobody takes animals, basically. That's the problem I was having. A lot of people would say, oh, he's just a cat, why do you worry about the cat? And I was determined I'm not gonna let my buddy go. I mean, without him, I'm not sure if I would have gotten out of this, to tell you the truth. Just really, because it can be discouraging. But he gave me a reason to go on, even in the toughest day. So I came down here and I decided to come by Father Joe's. They came by and they took us in. I couldn't believe it. I mentioned the cat. Hey, I have a cat. And they're like, no problem. That was the game changer for me, was having a place where I could leave the cat and go to work. And then since I got into Father Joe's, I got a regular job. I started saving up money. And we got a place to live. We got a house. He gave me a reason to go on. I mean, it's not easy being in the position I was in. There's some days at work where I'm just, even now, where I'm like, God, how can I go on? This is horrible. This is tough. And I think of him. I look forward to coming home, and he's there waiting for me. He's my best friend. Look at that.
There's nothing I could say that's better than how Chauncey could say it himself. And I mean, truly, that's the magic of the work that is done every day with the ability to serve clients exactly as they come to us with their cat, right?
Thank you for sharing that, Jesse. Um, I had the opportunity to meet Chauncey and Sniggle Fritz one day at My Dog is My Home, Father Joe's Village open house. And the thing that I just loved was there was another client there and his dog, and Sniggle Fritz and the dog were just BFFs. It was the cutest thing I've ever seen. And the 2 men were BFFs. So it was just such a collegial environment, and everybody felt welcome, and it was really, really special to see. So I loved that.
Thank you, Susan.
So let's turn back to you, Nick. I think all of this is super inspiring to see the outcomes, to hear the data. What are you anticipating in terms of any next steps or follow-up to this study?
Yeah, so before we get into the next steps, I'll just briefly touch on like what we have been communicating out, especially specifically to policymakers in terms of what we think the main takeaways from this are. And we've touched on them, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but just reaffirming that this is another example that individualized care works, meeting people where they are at with as few conditions as possible, and then giving them the support and services that they need, in this case, really pet-focused services. That is what allows people to get the help that they need and move on to housing and to stabilize and to be permanently housed into the future. And a really key piece of that I want to emphasize again is that having the staffing with like trained folks who are capable of meeting people with the services that they need, that is really where the magic happens. And then the second thing that we want to share out, especially to policymakers in other states that might be considering something like this, is that the POS funding was really key to get more of the providers to say yes to accepting folks with pets, investing in the infrastructure, training, and connections that are necessary to help people do that work and do it well was really key and a big lesson. A little small detail that I do want to bring up is one of the conversations that we heard with some of the providers in some spaces, I think maybe in more rural places, is struggles or issues with insurance and insurance policies. And while we didn't see a lot of money being dedicated to that in terms of POS dollars, we definitely heard that just kind of negotiating that was a bit of a barrier. And often other service providers helped other organizations kind of work through that. So just lifting that up for providers across the space that have gone through that and have worked on insurance policies, just being in community with other providers that maybe haven't been able to work through that is a really big value add that we as a community can work on. And then the last thing I'll highlight is just that all organizations, unsurprisingly express concern about what's going to happen with the close of these past dollars. A lot of groups are going to have to really redouble their efforts on fundraising and trying to think about how do we continue this work without that dedicated pot of funding that, again, I highlighted this earlier, that it enables them to get away from that choosing between groups of people, either folks with pets or serving folks who don't have pets. So those are the kind of key takeaways that we've been communicating out. And I think for us moving forward, what we are really interested in doing is continuing to work with ASPCA, My Dog is My Home, and all of the providers across California. We've had some conversations with HCD, and they seem to be very willing partners. And hopefully at the very close of this spending window, so in the summer of this year, maybe we can do what would be more of a complete evaluation with the entire length of the program, looking at all of the collective data and specifically looking at that infrastructure spending that we weren't able to access before. Obviously, that always requires us to try and look for some funding to do that kind of evaluation. But I think that's something that we're really interested in doing to be able to say a little bit more confidently and with even more kind of data points. Here's the impact that we saw. And I do think that it'd be really useful to specifically have some of the figures around infrastructure because we saw with Father Joe's Village how impactful that was. And we heard that from many other providers as well. So I think that's what our goal is hopefully this is just part one and part two will be coming soon.
Thank you, Nick. So we're kind of rounding out the panel piece. So if you've got questions, go ahead and put them into that Q&A section. We'll take another about 5 minutes, and then we'll turn to your questions. But before we do, Jesse, one last question for you. As we advocate for similar programs in other states and at the federal level, it's really helpful to hear your reflections on the design of the program. What did you value most about the program, and is there anything you would change about the program?
Well, I'm a big fan of PAWS. So I'm going to start by saying the partnership with our PAWS funder and the very apparent shared goal that we had of serving as many people as possible and helping them to end their homelessness was a beautiful partnership and continues to be a beautiful partnership. So I'll start with what would I like to change. It's very minor. I would say the bulk of what I have to say about PAWS funding is actually very positive. I would consider adding services like doggy daycare for our individuals who work or have appointments and the like and don't want to leave their animal in a crate for the duration of the day. And then Nick had mentioned emergency grooming services were covered, but just standard grooming services. We tend to have a lot of dogs with heavy undercoats or that really just need ongoing grooming to avoid emergency grooming needs in the future. So that would be a nice addition, I think. Otherwise, we were really building this process together with our PAWS analysts. And so, there were some, I won't call them hiccups, but there was just building of reporting processes and metrics and data points that weren't established right from the very beginning. And so when we look back at reports from the beginning of our pause funding versus the end of our pause funding, there's different things being measured. So it's not really an apples to apples measurement. So I think, knowing what those metrics and data points are at the beginning, as much as you can, of course, things are going to evolve, but as much as you can really help the provider to know how to collect that data, and to make sure that they're really gathering the information that's desired and, monitoring the success of the program. But otherwise, I would say, the things that are great, Nick called it out, the infrastructure changes are still here. Regardless of the pause funding being gone, the infrastructure changes are here. The relationships that we have built with other providers in the community, animal welfare organizations, those partnerships have continued and will continue to continue past the pause funding. And so we're just so grateful for the opportunity to have been able to comfortably open our doors to pets from a financial perspective so that we could really learn from that process and know what it is that we need to do to continue serving people with pets in the future so that we can help the individual to end their homelessness as quickly as possible and serve more people as a result.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think we can all agree. And I think anecdotally, we knew that this program was going to make a big difference. And it's so great to have the data bear that out. And it's especially important in the context of advocating for similar programs in other states and at the federal level. I think probably all of you have familiarity with the PUP Act at the federal level. That was designed. The bill was designed after this California program with that in mind. And now that we have that data, it really does bolster our ability to advocate for that. We also this year, along with My Dog Is My Home, advocated for a budget allocation in the New York state budget. Unfortunately, it did not get through this year, but as my New York colleagues will tell me, it usually takes 2 or 3 times before you can get anything into the New York budget. So we're not going to stop trying. We're going to continue to advocate there, and I would love to do it in all 50 states and really make a difference across all states. But this is the data that really helps us to do that, to demonstrate that this is not just putting money into a black hole. It really is making a difference in people's lives. So we're really happy about those legislative next steps, and we'll continue to do that. All right, with all of that said, we're going to turn now to your questions, and I should have just as part of that, Nancy Castro, I didn't see her on the attendee list, but she did actually submit a question asking about how the program can realistically translate to other states. And I would say 100%. I mean, this is the model we use for New York. This is the model we use for PUP Act. And, the components are obviously, low cost co-sheltering, making sure that that's flexible and can fit into whatever, facility constraints that there are. Providing basic support for the animals themselves, so we're setting them up for success in permanent housing along with the people, and so that means the behavioral supports, the veterinary support, food, and the basic supplies and equipment that you need to to have your pet in an indoor environment. So I think it's very easily translatable. So that's the short answer on that one. And we have 13 questions. I am going to, let's see, quickly scroll through. So there's a question for both Jesse and Nicholas about whether you guys collaborate with other organizations or institutions. I'll throw it to both of you, whomever.
Yeah, I'll start. We do. So learning from other shelter providers, being part of the co-sheltering collaborative has been such a wonderful network of people that are trying to do the same work and trying to learn from each other. So that's been great. Getting to know other, providers in the community, they're accepting pets and what they've learned through the process and what we can take from them and to be able to build and be stronger and share, from our own lessons learned. We've built wonderful relationships with animal welfare providers. San Diego Humane Society, I think right now, well, about an hour ago, was down in our lobby, which they are every month, to provide, supports to people who are living in shelter with pets and have questions about animal behavior, need some basic supplies and connections in the community. We have a lovely partnership with Helen Woodward that comes on site every month to provide free preventative, services, and then also to provide free spay and neuter. So just really great partnerships that we've built as a result of serving more animals. And then we're not doing the work by ourselves. So that's been lovely.
Yeah, and then at the beginning, I kind of mentioned it a little bit that we are a kind of different approach to research. We're not, I guess, a stereotypical academic research institute. A lot of what we do is collaborative in nature. We really believe in the collective impact kind of model. So yeah, undeniably, we work with a lot of both other research institutes as well as individual researchers, but also work with a bunch of providers, and we'll continue to push work forward in terms of researching and coming up with highlighting innovative practices like the POS program, as well as just highlighting best practices and also highlighting pain points in areas that need work in LA, California, and beyond.
Great. We have a question, and this is a softball question for Jesse, about animal inclusive policies, whether or not you guys provide assistance with those. And I can say for myself, I know Jesse is very free with sharing their pet policies and animal policies with other organizations. I'll let her talk about how to access those, certainly through the collaborative if you're a member of that. But then they asked, what are some of the key themes and considerations that you encourage for pet-friendly policies?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I'm always happy to share the documents that we've created. So yeah, please reach out to the Co-Sheltering Collaborative. They have sample documents that I've shared with them through open houses. My Dog is My Home has those documents. So what are some key things? I think for us, there's a distinction between pets and assistive animals at Father Joe's Villages. Assistive animals have access around our campus. We're pretty broad brushed with that. We have the same access for emotional support animals that we do for service animals. So those animals can go all around the campus, into the dining room spaces and into classrooms and the like with their owners. Pets are restricted more to pathways of travel, courtyards, and being in the living spaces with their owners. Pets for us, we established that pets have to be with the owner at intake. We started serving pets to remove a barrier to entry. We don't want someone to start to accumulate animals when they're living in shelter unless they need the animal as a reasonable accommodation for a disability. That makes them an assistive animal. But for a pet, we require that the pet be with them at intake. They cannot get a new pet while they're living in the program with us, because then that's going to make it harder for them to exit to housing. So we keep our eye on the prize all the time, that we want the individual to exit into permanent housing with income as quickly as possible. And we don't want them to create a barrier to exiting to that housing. So I would say that that's the biggest element of our policy, is that the pet needs to be with you at program intake. But otherwise, in those documents that you access, it'll give you our full policy around pets.
Very quick question from Ashley. Is there a current grant cycle open for applications? Unfortunately not. We are going to keep fighting for it though. Hope that we'll have future funding, but at this point, all of the funding has been allocated. Let's see. For Jesse, again, are clients allowed to adopt a new animal while receiving housing support?
If the animal is an emotional support animal or a service animal, yes, they can. But otherwise, if it's a pet, no, we don't allow them to get a new animal while they're living in shelter with us for the reasons I gave before.
Okay, from Sharita, she asked, can you speak more about the qualifications that staff have when hiring for the shelter? So I assume that's, kind of the ability to work with animals and people.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. When I started with Father Joe's Villages in 2010, we weren't serving animals at all. So we had a shelter team who was very accustomed and very skilled in working with people, but hadn't yet worked around animals. So when we started serving emotional support animals and service animals in 2010, we learned that our staff needed training in order to feel comfortable working around animals. There's, some stigma attached to breed and species, but also just real fear or a lack of comfort in working around animals. And so as far as specific qualifications, we're not looking for any particular training. What we're looking for is employees who are comfortable working around animals, but also are very good with their boundaries. So we do not have our expectation is that our staff are not physically interacting with the animals unless there's an emergency at play. So we need people with great boundaries with people that also extend to great boundaries in working around animals. So we need someone who is attentive and compassionate and lovely in the way that they work with folks, but that also can, look for and identify neglect or abuse that may be happening, and are really working or willing to work with the human and their animal together as a unit without interacting. They're not here to do puppy playtime. They're here to work with the human to end homelessness as quickly as possible.
Jesse, another one for you, and we're just going to wrap up here in a few minutes. So this may be the last question, but this is a really common question that obviously we get as we do this work. Is have you run into a conflict between a client who may be fearful or have allergies or be resistant to pets and pet owners, and how do you guys handle those conflicts?
It does happen from time to time, less than I think people would expect. When we were moving into serving animals, that was a question that came up a lot from our team: is what about allergies? It's not something that comes up often. I joke that we get more complaints about allergies to Christmas trees around the holiday time than we do around cats or dogs. So it's really a matter of, we have high expectations with our owners that they'll keep their space clean, that they'll keep their animal clean. If we know that someone has an allergy, we're not going to put them in the same room or in the same bunk space, depending on the program design of that building. So we're going to create space as much as possible. There are plugins that can be used for people with allergies and the like, but it's just not something that we hear about a lot. As far as complaints about living around animals, it's not common that we get someone that says that they don't feel safe living around an animal, or that they, have a fear. If anything, we have people that are very excited to have a roommate with a pet, because then they, feel like it's part of their little temporary household. And so it tends to be that we get people wanting to live with an animal rather than complaining about living with an animal. But it does come up from time to time, and that's where we use our conflict management skills. And we use motivational interviewing and all of the tools of our trade to make sure that we can talk through the issue with the person and then help them find a solution. So we're lucky to have multiple program environment. So if one space isn't working for someone, or we're seeing conflict that just can't be resolved, then we can move someone to another room and try to find a better fit.
Thank you, Jesse. So I think that's all we have time for. I really appreciate all of your engagement. You've had great questions and great engagement the entire session. Thank you to Jesse and to Nick, and all your contributions to this work. And thank you to My Dog is My Home for hosting the session and helping us get the word out about the importance of this program. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody, and we'll see you in the future.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks everyone for joining.
Chasing